Before this clip starts, I just want to point out that the film we're looking at is based on a short story, or novella, if you prefer, by Daphne du Maurier, who also wrote The Birds, which was directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and also the novel Rebecca, which was also made into a film by Alfred Hitchcock. Let's get started. Second in a series of film analysis clips that are aimed at teaching both students and teachers how to analyze film by reading it as an audio-visual text. The first film in the series, which was a breakdown of a gunfight scene from Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West, is very, very much school appropriate for all intents and purposes. The one that we're going to look at now, I would caution middle school teachers against using in class, and I would tell high school teachers, think really, really hard about it. I intend this one to be really more a practice for teachers than anything. The reason I say that is because this film, Don't Look Now, while the clip itself doesn't contain anything school inappropriate, the film itself certainly does. And once you walk your kids through this, they're going to want to watch the rest of the film. And I don't want to be the reason that you get called to the principal's office because some kid ordered it on Amazon and then had to look at a naked Donald Sutherland, which does happen in the movie, and it's unfortunate for all parties. So we're going to look again at things like color, we're going to look at sound, we're going to look at symbolism. As we're watching this, I want you to hold several thoughts in your mind. I want you to think about how uncomfortable this film is in terms of tone. I want you to think about the idea of a mirror in certain aspects, because that's really, really important. And just to give you some background on the film, 1973, it was directed by a guy named Nicholas Roeg, who directed some really, really great films. The Man Who Fell to Earth with David Bowie, Walkabout, which is a classic of the supernatural genre, and also more family-friendly, an adaptation of Roald Dahl's The Witches starring Angelica Houston. So I'm going to have to set up the plot a little bit more for you. Donald Sutherland stars as an architect who specializes in restoring old buildings. And the scene starts with him and his wife, Julie Christie, reviewing some slides of this new project that they're about to take on in Venice, which is a city, of course, covered by water. And the idea that they're moving to a city covered by water is going to become thematically really, really important later on. But without further ado, let's go ahead and watch. Alright, so in the very first shot, we have some strange images. We have this little girl in a red coat in the forest. And we have a horse that seems to be dismayed, running away and whinnying. So if you're going to ask yourself, well, what kind of scene is being set here? It's very, very, very much in the tradition of a fairy tale. There is a little girl in a red coat, echoing the idea of Red Riding Hood, who was, of course, a girl in danger. She's in this large forest, and there's a white horse running away, and it seems to be scared, but we don't know of what. If we look at kind of the contrasting elements of the scene, it's a very bright, sunny day. It's this sort of pastoral country scene. It's idyllic. There are these trees in the background that contrast with the green, green grass. There's a threat here. There's not so much one here. And she's pushing a wheelbarrow. So you're already getting this idea of a fairy tale about a child in danger. Our second establishing shot shows a little boy on a bike, very much in the same scene. We know they occupy the same space. And one of the things that I would point out here is the music. It is this very kind of shaky piano playing. Now, if you are a watcher of horror films, which this is, it's a very kind of unconventional horror film, you know that shaky, childlike music usually indicates something creepy is about to happen. The way that the piano is being played here indicates perhaps that, hey, this is a child playing it. So even though the music itself is very sweet and innocent, it's setting a pretty creepy tone. let's just take a look for a minute at the toy that this little girl is playing with, because it's really, really unsettling. It is a soldier who is speaking in a very childlike voice, because it's one of those pull string toys that talks to you, and it's wearing a gas mask. Now, this doesn't have any real bearing on the rest of the film. I think that this particular prop is here just to really kind of solidify that unsettled, uncomfortable tone. What kind of weird child plays with a toy that is a little kind of, G.I. Joe wearing a gas mask? That's weird.
This is your commandant speaking.
Alright, we have our first image of water in a film that is absolutely obsessed with water. And also notice all the red. Now, red can mean a lot of things. It can mean love, it can mean passion, or in the case of this film, just based on what we've already seen, it might mean violence. Also notice this whirling pattern, because this gets repeated throughout the film. There's a lot of repeated imagery in the film and in this scene. There's this idea of a circular pattern, there's the idea of water, etc.
Motor attack D10.
Now, a lot of people watching this will also see another very common horror convention, the handheld camera shot from a fairly low angle that indicates a kind of voyeurism. Probably the most famous example of this happens in Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where you see this handheld camera kind of looking through the tall glass, or the tall grass at the victims, indicating that the killer is watching them. Now, there's not really a conventional killer that we're going to see in this film, but we get the idea here that these children are being stalked. Alright, this is a really important shot, just spatially and also visually. Here is the house where the children live, and that's going to be established fairly soon here, and here is the little girl. The fact that she is at some distance from the house is really important. I also want to point out that these branches here really break up the frame. You have the two main subjects of the frame, the little girl and the house, but right here in the foreground is this kind of shattered image, all right? It's breaking up the picture. So the real subject of the frame is not the girl or the house, but the branches themselves. And Nick Rogue, like Sergio Leone from our previous episode, was really good at framing shots. So the fact that these branches are in the way is really important. This is not a mistake by the cameraman or the cinematographer. This idea of the shattered frame is really important. We're focusing on that water again, and again we have this mirror image. We cut to an interior based on the previous shot where you see the little girl in relationship to the house. We as an audience can make the leap and say, well, this is the inside of that house we saw previously, and here we get to the main characters of the film. We see Julie Christie with her back turned. That's important because she's going to prove to be a fairly oblivious character in what follows. So she's not looking at the action, she's not in tune with it. And then here in the foreground we have Donald Sutherland, who is looking at some slides. Alright, if we go back just a little bit here, we will see what he's looking at. It's a slide of a church that he's taken on a contract to restore in Venice. And here, it's magnified, it's very, very large, and we see this really strange looking figure in kind of the midground. And he's going to want to examine that further. Again, we see the figure magnified. That's important because one of the things that's really interesting about this film is how obsessed it is with the gaze, and how obsessed it is with looking at things in a closer light, and the conclusion that it comes to that sometimes characters really do miss the forest for the trees. So he's got it magnified here, and in these next couple of shots, he's going to try to magnify it in a different way, but that magnification doesn't give him any new information. Right, just to add emphasis here, Nick Rogue is like saying, hey, look at this, there's another mirror image. Here is a small person, who's dressed very similarly to the little girl outside, who just, by the logic of the cutting, we believe is probably his daughter or his niece or some relation of his.
What are you reading?
I was just trying to find the answer to a question Christine was asking me.
Alright, again, this idea of trying to find answers by examining things, by magnifying them, this seems to be a bit of kind of throwaway dialogue that doesn't really do anything story-wise, but it does turn out to be important.
The world's round, why is a frozen pond flat?
Again, we cut back to this very strange image of this short figure, and notice I'm not saying little girl, of this short figure in a church, magnified. It's as if the film's preoccupations are not with this couple or with their children, but with the meaning of this image.
It's a good question.
Alright, and here he's taken the image out of the projector, which has already magnified it, and now he's put it under a magnifying glass, and we're essentially getting the exact same image. And the implication here is that looking and seeing are not the same thing. He can magnify it all he wants, he can examine it as closely as he wants, but he's really missing the message here. Alright, and that little weird electronic thing there, that's signaling that something really terrible is about to go wrong. Notice here that you see the little girl, she's inverted in the water. Again, water is a huge thing with this film. And it's basically telling us in this shot that the water is dangerous. Beware of the water, okay? Very easily could have tilted the camera up and shown her walking along the edge of this pond or lake or whatever it is. But instead, he's basically kind of foreshadowing that she's going to be submerged. You can also notice that the light has changed. The tone of the scene has changed just via the lighting. It was bright and sunny. All of a sudden, we have clouds now. Alright, now remember when I called your attention to this frame here, the shattered image, well, take a look at how it gets mirrored over here. So she's running along the water again, ominous. Here comes her brother on his bike, and all of a sudden, we have literally the twin image of those branches earlier, alright? He rides over a piece of what looks like mirror, okay? So this idea of a shattered mirror, of a shattered image, of a shattered looking glass. And if you think about the magnifying glass and the projector earlier as kinds of looking glasses as well, that's the whole point here, is that your gaze, your eyes, what you use to observe things is really flawed. You can't see everything under the sun. Alright, this idea that we are empirical beings is being shattered. Again, also that shattering of the image earlier with the branches indicates that perhaps the main subject of this sequence is also going to be shattered. Alright, keeping in mind the relationship of the little girl to the house and the little girl to her brother earlier on in this shot, right here, when we see the little boy fall down, right here, We know that when Donald Sutherland looks up, he is not close enough to either of his children to have heard that breaking glass. So that begins to let us know something about his character. Perhaps he has a different way of seeing, perhaps he knows something that we don't, or perhaps he's just in tune with kind of the supernatural, which is going to be a big theme in the film, which again I cannot stress enough. Your kids, if you show them this, will want to watch it. You cannot show it to them. They can wait till college for that. But the idea here is that he has this sixth sense that has just been activated by this shattered glass.
Aha! Lake Ontario curves more than 3 degrees from its easternmost shore to its westernmost shore. So, frozen water isn't flat.
Everything is what it seems.
And here Donald Sutherland, in the first 3 minutes of the film, basically lays out the theme of the film. Nothing is what it seems, alright? This is a film about mystery. It's, again, a film about the gaze, about how what we see is not necessarily what is true. And so he's basically admitted that in the first few minutes. Nothing is what it seems.
I see.
Did you put all the window slides together?
No, I put duplicates in my tray.
Alright, again, this scene is all about mirroring. There's a couple of things that I want to call your attention to. Now Julie Christie is almost dominated in the frame by this blank slate. Julie Christie will find herself under the influence of some very powerful forces later that can impose themselves on her precisely because she is such a blank slate. Now, if you watch what she does with her hands,
No, I put duplicates in my tray.
and what her daughter does with her hands, again, there is some mirroring there. It's all about these dual images. Here's a very, very random shot of, somebody's old lunch or some old dinner. You really kind of have to wonder why it's in here. Part of it is to show how very kind of conventional and bourgeoisie these people are. But at the same time, there's a lot going on in here color-wise. Here is a carcass. Here is some food that appears to be rotting very, very steadily. Again, none of the shots in this clip are unintentional or accidental. I'm not quite sure what this shot means, quite frankly, but it is in there for a reason, and it would be an interesting thing to ask your students why they think it exists. Again, this shot establishes that distance. Donald Sutherland, who now appears to be restless inside the house, could not possibly have known what was happening outside. His little girl is even farther away. Notice how dwarfed she is in the frame. Little Red Riding Hood is deep into the forest, or at least at the edge of it. Alright, so here is a lot of stuff being thrown. Again, all of these mirror images, and then Donald Sutherland spills this glass of water. Again, water is a really ominous presence in this film. Perhaps it's calling back to Samuel Taylor Coleridge and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. Probably not that intentional, but it is fun to make these connections. Right, notice the slide that the water has spilled on. Here is this twirling image of red again. That's going to become really important. And then all of a sudden the slide starts to bleed because it's water damaged, and that blood is coming directly, or that ink I should say, is coming directly from this image of the small person in the red coat, which is about as foreshadowing as it gets. Alright, Donald Sutherland again becomes aware that something is not quite right, and you see his son in the previous shot running silently, and I want you to pay attention to when Donald Sutherland actually hears his son's voice, because this indicates really, really strongly that he does have some kind of second sight or sixth sense.
the matter?
All right, and now we know fully what has happened. The little girl somehow has drowned. Here's where the little boy starts yelling, and here's the first point at which Donald Sutherland's character could have heard him. So we know pretty definitively that Donald Sutherland has some kind of psychic power. And what you'll find out later on in the film, if you watch all of it, is that Donald Sutherland really struggles with understanding this power and using it effectively. Ultimately, because he is too rational, his power doesn't serve him that well. Alright, we cut back on the little boy, who at this point seems very, very disturbed, but we need to watch him more closely later. Alright, so here we're looking at this bloody image again, and you notice that it started to really metastasize. If you look at the shape of this, it almost looks like a finger beckoning to you. Alright, so Nicholas Roeg, just like Sergio Leone in the previous clip, was a very accomplished digital stylist, and he was a director who did not make mistakes or commit accidents in his film. There is a reason that there is a shot of this book in this film. And if you look at the title of it, Beyond the Fragile Geometry of Space, that implies two things. Number one, that it is beyond. The world that these people are about to experience is beyond their rational understanding of the universe. Again, going back to that implied sixth sense that Donald Sutherland has. It also implies that their world is fragile, that this comfortable kind of country lifestyle and this very nice old house that they're living in is very, very easily breakable. And that goes back to the whole image of the shattered frame. All right? The world that they're living in is in the process of being broken apart. Okay? So that title alone tells us a whole lot about the theme of the film. And here she tosses away that very, very important slide. Julie Christie, again, is a character who is not in tune with a second sight or a sixth sense. And so she doesn't read anything into this very ominous blood red slide that she has just looked at. All right. The image begins to metastasize. The music changes. Again, there's a very important mirroring going on here. The redness of the slide mirrors the kind of curve and redness of the little girl's body. There's some very intentional slow motion going on here. It's almost ridiculous. Notice this anguished mouth. Again, just to underscore the mirroring there, pretty much twin images. One of the things that has been pointed out to me is that this ruined slide now begins to take on a form that very much resembles that of a fetus. So if you think previously about the shots of the slide, that kind of beckoning finger, now you have this image of birth. So the little girl, this image of innocence, dies, and now something else is being born. And just based on the music and the juxtaposition of the shots, we can assume that this thing, this fetal life stage here that is being born, is not good. It's evil. Again, the colors deepen, and all of a sudden, something springs forth from it. Its mind is being born, almost. We have these very awkward attempts at, CPR. Donald Sutherland is obviously not a very worldly man. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He's become more or less useless as a father and protector here. Now we get this really strange image of the son, who previously had looked very concerned, but now he's kind of very casually looking on. Perhaps he's in shock, or perhaps, as it has been suggested to me by some students, again, who were not middle schoolers, perhaps he's the one who pushed her in the water. Maybe that's why he's so casual, just sort of very, very nonchalantly there, sucking on his cut finger. I don't know if that's true, but it doesn't add an interesting layer of subtext. There's almost kind of unintentional bit of slapstick here. Again, Donald Sutherland is this very ineffectual, very weak man. We kind of cut to Julie Christie here, nonchalantly smoking a cigarette, who's, again, just oblivious to everything going on around her. She doesn't have the potential psychic power that her husband does. And then, all of a sudden, she becomes aware. And then you have this really famous jump cut. This is several months on. The family is now in Venice. You see the greenery and the moisture and the water here that was, in the establishing shots of the opening scene, sort of very inviting and pastoral and idyllic and beautiful. Now it just looks like decay. And so this glove is Donald Sutherland, and he's trying to get beneath that decay. But whether or not he succeeds is something that you'll have to find out if you decide to watch the whole film.